I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
The royal procession had already begun when Princess Anne saw the flash of gold against Meghan's coat. Her expression changed instantly. Without consulting the king, the guards, or the officials walking behind her, Anne raised one gloved hand and ordered the entire procession to stop. Music faltered. Horses stood motionless. Hundreds of guests watched as she stepped toward the woman wearing a brooch the family believed had been sealed away with Diana's most deeply personal possessions. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Windsor Castle had been prepared for a remembrance procession, a formal royal ceremony in which senior family members follow a planned route to honor a person. King Charles walked near the front, with William, Catherine, Harry, Meghan, Camilla, military officers, courtiers, and guests behind him. Everything had been timed. One break in formation could signal conflict before the watching public. Anne crossed the distance between them and fixed her eyes on the gold brooch pinned above Meghan's heart. The jewel carried a small engraved rose around a pale sapphire, and it had last appeared in a secured collection reserved for Diana's sons. That detail changed the moment from awkward to dangerous. This was not an ornament. It was a private piece, tied to grief, inheritance, and promises made after Diana's death. Meghan covered the brooch with one hand. Confidence vanished, as Anne quietly asked where she had obtained it. Harry moved between them, insisting the piece had been given privately and the procession should continue. His aunt refused to step back. She told him Diana's memory could not be used to silence a direct question, and the words struck harder because everyone understood the accusation. William recognized the jewel at the same instant. He had seen it years earlier during a private inventory, an official record kept to prevent possessions from being lost or wrongly claimed. His jaw tightened as he remembered the velvet case closing over it. Catherine noticed his reaction, then looked closer at the fastening and saw something that made her whisper his name. Charles turned toward the mounted guards, lowered his program, and gave no order. That silence handed control to Anne. Meghan said Harry had given her the brooch that morning, but when every face turned toward him, he did not answer quickly enough. Anne called for a royal equerry, an officer who assists senior members of the household, and ordered the family members escorted inside. The procession had stopped because of a jewel, but beyond the doors, the real danger would be what each of them believed that jewel proved. Behind closed doors, the gold brooch no longer looked like an ornament. It became a dividing line. To Anne, it represented a dead woman whose private belongings had been guarded for decades. To Harry, it carried the memory of a mother he still felt had been taken from him. To Meghan, it was proof that she belonged beside him. And to William, it was something more dangerous, a sign that someone had entered a collection no one was supposed to reach. Anne stood beside the long table and refused to soften what the jewel meant. Years earlier, after Diana's death, she had promised both sons that certain personal pieces would never become ceremonial costumes, bargaining tools, or weapons in family disputes. The secured collection was a protected group of private belongings kept under controlled access, so no household could remove, display, or claim them without permission. Breaking that protection threatened more than property. It reopened grief both brothers had carried since childhood. Harry stared at the brooch and remembered seeing his mother wear it during a private family dinner. He believed objects connected to Diana should remain close to her children, not disappear behind palace locks and official records. Meghan stood near the closed window, embarrassed but defiant, and told the room that her husband had chosen the jewel because he wanted his mother represented beside them during the procession. She spoke with conviction, but one hand remained pressed against the gold. William did not shout. His controlled anger made the room colder. He asked his brother one precise question. Had he personally removed the brooch from their mother's secured collection? Harry looked down before answering, that it had already been in his possession. The hesitation mattered. The future king knew his brother's grief, but he also knew that someone had crossed a boundary designed to protect them both. Catherine stepped closer and gently asked Meghan to unpin the jewel until its history could be verified. She refused, hearing judgment where the princess intended caution. To Meghan, surrendering it meant allowing others to decide whether she could carry Diana's memory. To Catherine, keeping it on allowed an unknown person to control the entire family through one carefully chosen object. Charles sat at the end of the table as his sons spoke over one another. He pressed 2 fingers against his forehead when Diana's name transformed the dispute from an official problem into an old wound. Anne then turned the brooch over and exposed a tiny inscription, "For courage when the room turns cold." William recognized the words immediately. His mother had once shown them to him privately. Anne asked who had authorized access. Camilla denied any role, yet Catherine caught her glance toward a senior household aide. Then Harry finally admitted the truth. He had not retrieved the brooch. It arrived in a sealed box with a handwritten note claiming Diana had intended it for his future wife. That note offered him everything he wanted to believe. But Anne had seen enough royal handwriting to know that comforting words could conceal a deliberate trap. The brooch had not simply appeared on the morning of the procession. Its journey had begun weeks earlier, during a private memorial meeting that ended with a sentence nobody understood at the time. A locked cabinet had been opened, an old inventory had been altered, and one palace aide had walked away carrying a narrow velvet case, while the rest of the room continued discussing Diana's legacy, as though nothing had changed. Anne returned to the documented account from a confidential palace inventory review held 3 weeks earlier. An inventory review was a formal check of stored royal possessions, used to confirm where each item belonged and who could access it. William, Catherine, Camilla, and senior collection staff had gathered to decide which of Diana's belongings might appear in a future exhibition. The gold brooch was rejected immediately. Its inscription spoke to private pain, not public duty, and displaying it risked turning a deeply personal struggle into palace spectacle. Camilla waited until the meeting was nearly over before speaking quietly to Deputy Keeper Julian Harcourt. A deputy keeper was an official responsible for protecting and recording important objects inside the royal collection. She instructed him to remove the velvet case from the restricted family archive, a secured area holding possessions that could not be moved without special approval, and place it among items awaiting legal clarification. Harcourt nodded once, then he carried it away. Anne had seen him leave. At the time, she assumed the transfer had been approved for documentation. Now the memory struck with brutal force. That was the exact moment the brooch left its protected chain of custody, the written record showing every person who handled an item. She had watched the breach happen and failed to recognize it. The warning had come earlier. Anne had told Charles that reopening Diana's private collection could tear at wounds between William and Harry that had never fully healed. The king dismissed her concern, saying the family could not remain trapped under the weight of the past. His sister remembered the sentence now, not as strength, but as permission for carelessness. Harry received the package 10 days before the procession. He opened it alone, read the handwritten note twice, and felt years of grief collapse into hope. The message claimed Diana had intended the brooch for his future wife. When Meghan questioned whether it was safe to wear, he assured her no one would challenge an object carrying his mother's blessing. That confidence led them directly into Anne's raised hand. Catherine tested the note against a private birthday letter preserved at Kensington Palace, the London residence connected to William's household. She found 3 letters formed differently. Then she noticed the embossed mark on the paper. It belonged to the current royal household. Anne placed the forged note before Charles and asked who inside his own household wanted Meghan wearing the brooch before the entire world. The king could no longer call it a misunderstanding. Someone had built the moment deliberately, and the person most likely to know why was standing only a few feet away. Anne did not raise her voice when she confronted Camilla. She did something far more unsettling. She closed the chamber door, placed the forged note beside Diana's brooch, and asked one clear question. Why was this sent to Harry? The room fell silent. Charles stared at his wife. William watched his father. Meghan stood frozen beside the object that had placed her at the center of another royal fracture. Then Camilla gave an answer that changed the entire conflict. Anne sat opposite the Queen Consort, with no aides between them. Charles, William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan remained in the room, each waiting for someone else to break first. A restricted archive was a protected storage area where private family possessions could not be moved without formal permission. The brooch had left that protection after Camilla's order, and every person present understood why that mattered. Someone had turned Diana's pain into a public trap. Anne slid the jewel across the polished table and demanded an explanation for Julian Harcourt's instruction to remove it. Camilla reacted with offense, then unease. She admitted requesting a review of several Diana-related items, but denied ordering the brooch sent to Harry or authorizing the false note. Her words were firm. Her hands were not. Meghan stepped forward and accused Anne of assuming guilt because she had worn it. The Princess Royal answered without hesitation. Meghan's feelings were not the crime. The violation was that someone had used Diana's memory as a weapon, knowing the family would turn against itself before asking who created the lie. Harry snapped that every object connected to his mother became controlled the moment he reached for it. William refused to let grief excuse the unanswered questions. He told his brother that pain did not give either of them the right to ignore how the brooch had been obtained. The words landed hard, because both men knew this argument had begun long before that morning. Camilla finally admitted why she wanted the jewel moved. She feared its inscription would appear in the planned exhibition and renew public scrutiny of how isolated Diana had felt inside royal life. A documented account from Harcourt's office showed that he took the instruction further. He believed placing the brooch with Meghan would create a scandal powerful enough to stop the exhibition completely. Charles then broke his silence. In a recorded conversation weeks earlier, Harcourt had warned him the exhibition could damage the Queen's standing. The king had not approved sabotage, but he had failed to remove the aid after hearing the threat. Anne pushed back her chair. She told her brother that silence became participation when a monarch saw danger and chose comfort over action. A security officer entered before Charles could answer. Harcourt had vanished from his assigned rooms, taking 2 archive files with him. The confrontation had exposed motive, fear, and failure. But with the aid gone and the records missing, nobody knew who controlled the next move. The brooch belonged to Diana's memory, but the decision now belonged to the living. Charles held the formal authority to end the inquiry, protect his wife, and restart the procession without explanation. Anne held the moral authority of the promise she had made to Diana's sons. William controlled access to much of his mother's private legacy. And Meghan still wore the jewel, refusing to surrender the one object Harry believed had crossed decades to reach her. Charles could order the procession to continue, but he could not decide the brooch's future alone. Diana's private collection required the consent of her sons and the family custodians appointed to protect it. A custodian was someone trusted to guard important possessions and prevent them from being moved or claimed without approval. That rule mattered because the jewel carried emotional ownership, not just financial value, and any careless decision could deepen the divide between William and Harry. Anne did not own the brooch, yet her influence was impossible to ignore. For years, she had helped protect private family belongings from becoming political symbols or public trophies. She demanded that the jewel be secured until its removal was fully investigated. Charles resisted, then stepped into an adjoining room with Harcourt's warning memorandum in his hand. The king read the document alone. A memorandum was a written internal warning used to record concerns and proposed action. Harcourt had stated clearly that the Diana exhibition could damage Camilla's standing and provoke a new wave of public anger. Charles folded the page slowly as his hand trembled. He had seen the first sign of the scheme and chosen not to confront it. William and Harry now faced the decision their father could not make for them. The brooch could remain with Meghan while the note was examined, or it could return to protected storage. Neither choice felt harmless. One risked rewarding manipulation. The other risked making Harry believe his mother had been taken from him again. Meghan finally reached for the clasp. Catherine had not ordered her to remove it. She simply warned that keeping it on would allow Harcourt's plan to define why she had worn it. The words broke through her resistance. Meghan unpinned the jewel and placed it on a folded handkerchief between the brothers. Harry looked wounded by the gesture. William promised the brooch would not disappear behind palace walls again. Then Anne revealed what the missing archive files contained. Diana's private instructions for dividing certain personal pieces when her sons were emotionally ready. One line made the room colder. Diana had not named either brother. She had written that the brooch belonged to the one who understands the courage it required. Anne rejected Charles's attempt to restart the procession. Every smile outside would become another performance, unless the family reached an honest decision first. The king finally surrendered control of the inquiry to Anne and William, while ordering Harry and Meghan to remain until the missing instructions were recovered. For the first time that day, the family had a clear chain of command, but the decision came too late to contain what had already begun outside the castle walls. When the royal procession finally moved again, 4 places remained empty. Anne had stayed behind to secure Diana's brooch. William remained with the investigation. Harry refused to return without Meghan, and Meghan could not face the waiting crowds after removing the jewel. Outside, the music resumed. Inside, the silence became unbearable. Each person now understood that the stopped procession would be remembered long after the reason for the ceremony itself had faded. Charles ordered the public ceremony to continue. He believed cancellation would create something even more damaging, a constitutional spectacle, meaning a family crisis so public that it could weaken confidence in the monarchy itself. Catherine returned to his side and walked through the remainder of the route without William. Her calm face carried the burden of unity, but she knew both brothers were still inside Windsor, arguing over their mother's legacy. Meghan heard the distant music and sat alone on a narrow bench. She pressed the empty fabric where the brooch had been, fighting tears as the meaning of her absence settled in. The public would not hear the private explanations. They would see only that she had disappeared after Anne stopped the procession, and they would decide why before the palace could speak. Harry paced before a closed door, furious that the institution had continued without them. He told Meghan the monarchy could erase people whenever their pain became inconvenient. She asked him to stop speaking for a moment, yet he kept moving, trapped between protecting his wife and proving that Diana's memory still belonged to him. William entered carrying a recovered security log. A security log was the official record showing when protected rooms were entered and which access code opened them. He ignored his brother's anger, placed the document down, and revealed that Harcourt had used a private code assigned to Camilla's household. The evidence did not settle the blame. The code had been copied months earlier, meaning the Queen Consort's office had been exploited rather than directly exposed. However, a documented internal report showed that someone inside that office had noticed irregular access and remained silent. 392 Camilla summoned her longtime assistant, Elaine Mercer. The aide admitted she had discovered unusual entries weeks before the procession, but feared reporting them would embarrass the household. The Queen removed Mercer's official badge from the access file, placed it on the desk, and ordered her suspension. Anger crossed her face first. Shame followed, because fear of scandal had allowed the danger to grow. Anne then received worse news. Harcourt had contacted a national broadcaster and offered archive pages claiming Diana wanted the brooch given to Harry's wife. The family had only minutes to prove whether the documents were genuine. A call from palace security cut through the room. Harcourt had been located near the old Windsor service gate, carrying one stolen file but not the other. The man who engineered the crisis was finally within reach, yet the missing document could still vindicate Harry's belief, or destroy it completely. The turning point did not come from the king, the guards, or the recovered archive. It came when William asked everyone to leave the room except Harry. For the first time that day, there were no wives, no courtiers, no titles, and no institution standing between them. On the table lay Diana's gold brooch and the forged note. Between the brothers stood something heavier, the fear that one of them had been chosen by their mother and the other had not. William sat opposite his brother and stared at the open velvet case. He admitted that his first reaction had not been only suspicion, it had been jealousy. The prince feared the note might be genuine, and that Diana had privately chosen Harry's future wife to receive something she had never discussed with him. That possibility cut deeply, because the brooch was not merely jewelry. It carried one of the few private messages their mother had left behind. Harry looked down before answering. He confessed that he had ignored the wrong paper, the unfamiliar handwriting, and the unexplained delivery, because the message gave him what he had wanted for years. It offered proof that Diana would have understood Meghan and approved of the life he had chosen. The Duke had not examined the note carefully, because grief had already told him what he wanted it to say. Silence pulled both men backward. They remembered the same childhood dinner, when Diana touched the brooch before entering a room filled with tension. She had told them that courage sometimes meant walking into a place where nobody wanted to hear the truth. William remembered her steady voice. Harry remembered holding her hand. For one brief moment, they were not rivals defending separate lives. They were two sons, missing the same mother. William then opened the recovered archive file taken from Harcourt. An archive file was a protected record, containing private instructions, ownership details, and the history of important family possessions. Inside it lay Diana's authentic direction. She had not left the jewel to one son, or a future wife. She had asked William and Harry to decide together when its meaning could unite, rather than divide them. Harry read the line twice. His anger slowly disappeared. He admitted that wearing the brooch during the procession, under false circumstances, had violated the exact spirit of her request. William answered that hiding it forever behind palace walls would betray that wish as well. The brothers called Anne back into the room. Together, they asked that the jewel enter a small memorial exhibition beside Diana's real words, not the forged message. Meghan would return it publicly with dignity, and the palace would confirm she had worn it in good faith, after being deliberately deceived. Harry then asked whether Anne had stopped the procession to punish Meghan. She held his gaze. Once the brooch passed the castle gates, she said, the lie would have become history. The family finally possessed the truth, but outside, the public had already built its own verdict from one frozen image. By evening, the world had reduced the entire crisis to one photograph. Anne standing rigid in the road, Meghan's hand covering the gold brooch, Harry leaning forward, and Charles watching from behind. The image carried no explanation, yet everyone believed it revealed the truth. Some saw a princess protecting Diana's memory. Others saw a woman publicly humiliated by a family determined to control her. The monarchy now had to confront both interpretations at once. The next edition of the Daily Chronicle carried the frozen procession image across its front page, beneath the headline, "Anne Stops the Crown." A circular inset enlarged the brooch above Meghan's heart, turning one private object into the center of a national argument. A national evening presenter then opened the broadcast by saying the ceremony meant to honor royal continuity had instead exposed a battle over who had the right to represent Diana. Crowds gathered outside the gates of Windsor Castle before darkness fully settled. Some supporters placed white roses beside handwritten notes, thanking Anne for protecting the late princess. Others left messages expressing sympathy for Meghan's humiliation. Windsor Castle was not merely a royal residence in that moment. It had become the public stage on which grief, loyalty, and suspicion were being judged by strangers. Catherine watched the coverage in silence, before switching off the television. She told William that any palace statement had to defend Meghan from blame without hiding the failures that allowed the manipulation. The princess understood why that balance mattered. Protecting the institution with half-truths would only repeat the same mistake that had allowed Harcourt's scheme to grow. Meghan sat alone, reading the hostile headlines until Harry joined her. Her hands shook as she admitted the worst part was not the public anger. It was knowing she had accepted the brooch because she wanted to believe she had been welcomed by someone she had never met. Harry tried to comfort her, but he could not undo the false hope he had helped create. Anne dictated a rare personal line for the palace statement. She declared that Meghan had worn the jewel in good faith, and that the procession was halted to protect everyone deceived by its unlawful removal. The words carried weight, because the Princess Royal rarely explained herself publicly. Harcourt's motive emerged through a recorded interview following his detention. He admitted creating the confrontation to force the palace to abandon the Diana exhibition and prevent renewed criticism of the household. Camilla's suspended assistant, Camilla's supplied the missing access records, proving neither Prince nor Diana's estate had authorized the gift. The complete statement shifted the public mood. Debate remained fierce, but the central accusation weakened, because Meghan was confirmed as a target, not a thief. The palace then announced that the family would return to Windsor's public courtyard the next morning to reveal the brooch's final fate. The monarchy could not erase the image that divided the nation, but it could decide whether the next one would deepen the wound or finally close it. The following morning, there was no procession, no marching music, and no attempt to pretend the previous day had not happened. Anne entered the courtyard carrying Diana's gold brooch inside its restored velvet case. Meghan walked beside Harry. William and Catherine approached from the opposite side, while Charles and Camilla waited behind them. For once, the family did not arrange itself by rank. It gathered around the object that had nearly divided them beyond repair. A small group of charity representatives, collection staff, military officers, and members of the public watched in silence. Windsor's courtyard had become the place where the family would correct the lie created there the day before. The collection staff were officials responsible for protecting and recording important royal possessions. Their presence mattered, because the brooch's future would no longer depend on private promises, missing files, or the judgment of a single household. Meghan opened the velvet case and lifted the jewel one final time. Her hands shook, but she remained composed as she placed it on a simple display cushion. Anne stood beside her rather than opposite her. That quiet change carried more weight than any speech. The woman who had stopped the procession was no longer confronting Meghan. She was protecting her from carrying blame that did not belong to her. Harry turned privately to William and said their mother's memory could never again be used as proof that one brother had been loved, understood, or chosen more than the other. The future king agreed. Together, they approved clear written rules, requiring both brothers' consent before any of Diana's personal possessions could be moved, displayed, or offered to another household. Charles then accepted responsibility. He announced Harcourt's dismissal, an independent review of archive security, and the removal of officials who had concealed the access breach. An independent review meant an investigation led outside the household involved, preventing loyalty or fear from shaping the result. The king then faced Anne and admitted her refusal to remain silent had stopped a lie from entering the crown's official history. Camilla did not avoid her part. In a documented palace statement, she acknowledged that fear of renewed judgment surrounding Diana had influenced the careless transfer order. The Queen Consort accepted permanent removal from all decisions involving the late princess's private collection. The final record cleared Meghan completely. She had worn the brooch believing Harry had lawfully received it, while he had been deceived by a forged message. The jewel would now appear only during carefully chosen memorial exhibitions beside Diana's authentic instruction that it belonged to neither household alone. Anne stepped back and allowed Meghan to close the display case. Protection had not required possession. Accountability had not become cruelty. Stopping the procession was never about Anne defeating Meghan, Harry challenging William, or Diana triumphing over Camilla. It marked the moment the family refused to let grief, fear, and manipulation speak in her name. The monarchy survived because its members finally stopped performing unity long enough to practice honesty. Diana's brooch had returned to its true meaning, not as a prize claimed by one woman or one son, but as proof that courage begins when a family chooses truth over appearance. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.